500 years ago, the world was divided by oceans, ruled by kings, and driven by hunger. 500 years from now, hunger itself may be long forgotten, but the hunger for knowledge, for prestige, and for shaping our destinies remains. After all, such ambitions are not exclusive to humanity, they may even outlast us, carried forward to new worlds by those who follow, whatever form they may take. Dinner and Tales of the Future. The dining hall aboard the Modellane was an impressive space, lined with reinforced windows that framed the endless void beyond. Earth was a pale blue dot, fading behind them as the ship's drive carried them toward the neutron star system that was their penultimate destination. The hum of machinery and the occasional clinks of utensils on ceramic were the only sounds as the ship's senior crew and the 7 VIPs gathered for their last formal meal together. Captain Dominic Rourke sat at the head of the long table, his presence imposing but quiet. To his right sat XO Nathan Osai, who had spent most of the meal in easy conversation with Dr. Becky Laurent Hoshino about atmospheric dynamics and how different star types impacted them. Across from them, Security Chief Idris Kalu watched the VIPs carefully, his polite, friendly smile at odds with his sharp-eyed gaze. The Magnificent Seven, as they had been dubbed, to Rourke's quiet irritation, had spent the first leg of the journey settling into their temporary accommodations aboard the Modellane. But this was the first time they were all gathered with the ship's leadership. Their own smaller ship, the St. Christopher, waited in hibernation with the rest of the crew and passengers until they reached their destination. Captain Rourke reflected that the St. Christopher, while roughly the size of a great 20th century battleship, fit easily inside the Modellane's immense superstructure, over a kilometer in radius and nearly 24 kilometers long. In fact, the St. Christopher was not much smaller than the first interstellar vessel sent to Alpha Centauri, the one he had served on as a junior officer long ago. The expedition's last-minute addition to his otherwise straightforward mission, transporting settlers to the distant Aurelius system, seemed to excite his XO. To Rourke, however, it was a cause for concern. He knew his distractions and worries were interfering with his role as host, and the resulting awkward silence had settled over the table. It was Linzu Castellan, the expedition leader, who finally broke it.
"I suppose it's fitting," he mused, swirling the amber liquid in his glass, "that we begin with a meal. The first journeys of human expansion were always marked by the sharing of bread, wine, or something approximating it. 1,000 years ago, it was the age of great explorers crossing the seas. 500 years ago, humanity had yet to set foot on another planet besides Earth, just our once lifeless moon. Now, preparing to cross a different kind of ocean, I wonder where we shall be in 1,000 years.
"Still some distance from our destination," Magnus Vec remarked dryly, the large uplifted Astrosemian clearly taking exception to Castillon's repeated references to humanity.
A murmur of polite remarks and chuckles passed through the group. Rourke did not join in. He had little patience for poetic reflections and couldn't read Vec's human expression well, making him something of an enigma, just like KL-74, who spoke next. KL-74, his tall, genetically refined form, at odds with a rigid, human-designed seat he occupied, leaned forward.
"And yet, in all this time, the nature of the journey has changed very little. Whether across oceans or between stars, it is still a matter of resource, ambition, and survival. My clade has studied the expansion of human history with great interest. It is clear to us that the colonies that thrive will not be those that attempt to replicate the past, but those that embrace something entirely new."
He gestured subtly to both himself and Vec.
"A Jovian perspective," muttered Magnus Vec, the Astrosemian mining engineer, shifting in his own reinforced seat, a throne-like chair built to accommodate his immense frame. "Not everyone can afford to reinvent civilization every time they move. Some of us actually have to work in the rocks and snowballs to make those grand visions possible."
The tension was slight but noticeable. Rourke let it simmer, observing,
Let them clash a little, he thought. Better to see their frictions now than later.
Dr. Becky Laurent Hoshino smiled at Magnus and took the opportunity to steer the conversation in a different direction.
That's why we study the stars, isn't it? To understand what's actually possible. We like to think we can build forever, but nature always reminds us that there are rules. Even neutron stars, dead cores of ancient suns, still hold mysteries we can barely grasp. With the nearest one being 400 light-years away, we have yet to even send a flyby probe to one. Our own survival may depend on understanding them, and that's why this expedition matters.
At that, Valeria Treskova finally spoke up. She'd been quiet until now, watching, thinking.
There are still things we don't understand about even our own sun, she said.
That caught Rourke's attention. Treskova seemed both hesitant and defiant in tone and manner. Glancing around the table, he saw he wasn't the only one who noticed. She hesitated only a second before continuing.
Years ago, during an early test for stellar mass manipulation preparing a star-lifting pilot project, I was called to investigate a failed solar station, one that had been deployed since the 22nd century and was entirely automated. The AI running it had gone strange.
Strange how? Osei asked, leaning in.
It started seeing things that weren't there. Reporting signals it later dismissed as errors, after also claiming to have sent maintenance drones to recover debris from some other satellite. One it also later claimed was a hallucination. The station itself was damaged in a way that suggested something else had been there.
There was a beat of silence before Dr. Kenshi Hoshino, the historian, asked the question hanging in the air.
You think it found something?
Seated next to his wife, a slight amused smirk crossed his otherwise unlined face, at odds with his being the oldest member of either crew. Valeria held his gaze.
I think it may have, and I think some of us are here because they believe the same thing.
Someone muttered about the RX signal. A glance passed between Lin Zun Castellan and Lyra Voss, subtle but not unnoticed. For the first time, Rourke saw not just guests, not just scientists and politicians, but players in a larger game, one he had no intention of losing control over.
You think there might be ancient alien civilizations hanging around our corner of the galaxy?
Hoshino asked, his smirk melting into a look of friendly curiosity. Valeria took up the smirk herself.
Surely the notion must have crossed your mind. Why else would a prominent historian travel to a neutron star hundreds of light years from Earth?
Kenji shrugged. My wife is the astrophysicist. We've been married for over 400 years. Where she goes, I go. Besides, even Chicago can get boring after that long.
He then proceeded to launch into a number of humorous historical anecdotes about the Windy City's 700-year history. The conversation did not return to the mission for the rest of the dinner. The captain's concerns.
I'm not sure I understand what's bothering the old man, Commander Osei said to Colonel Kalu as they walked away from the dinner.
This is your first journey in interstellar space, Kalu asked.
You know that it's not Idris. I was born around Alpha Centauri, came back on the same ship the captain did.
Yes, said Kalu, and he was on that prestigious first mission, composed of nothing but the best and brightest, focused on settling Alpha Centauri for all mankind. In the intervening centuries, standards have gone down, and more to the point, interstellar missions are still extraordinarily expensive, as is getting permission to colonize a system. So a lot of missions have been hijacked to one degree or another by some onboard element. That tends to be an outbound problem, not something that happens on a return trip to Earth.
He gestured to the small Centauri medal on the commander's dress uniform, its lack of repeat cluster symbolizing he'd only been on one leg of the voyage. Then he pointed to his own rack of medals, where a red medal with the symbol of Mars showed many repeat awards.
The commander paused and turned to Kalu. I'm not naive or unacquainted with history. This isn't some group of colonists sneaking on board under false pretenses or a case of children born on the trip changing their minds, like what happened on the missions to Lakai, or New Actium, or with some of us Centaurans, for that matter. This is a science crew tagging along because we're passing close to the first neutron star in humanity's expansion sphere, and they convinced someone to fund a piggyback trip to set up a long-term science colony and support settlements. I doubt a dead star is interesting or valuable enough to hijack a colony ship. Even if it were, you have 10,000 colonial marines to discourage it.
All but a single company of which are already on ice, Nathan. And once we're past the Kuiper Belt, it'll be down to one platoon rotating a wake at a time, with only a junior officer and a few sergeants to watch for threats and make decisions.
The commander grunted at that. Soon he would go from XO of a ship carrying more than 1 million passengers and tens of thousands of crew to overseeing a skeleton crew, rotating through 5-year shifts, waking every few centuries for another turn. This wasn't a matter of life support or even lifetimes. Life extension technology had long since eliminated aging. Modern 26th century medicine no longer even required people to wake from hibernation to heal the radiation damage caused by interstellar travel or the radioisotopes in their own bones. No, the real concern was whether people would die of boredom on the millennia-long journey to RxJ1856.5-3754. At 400 light-years from Earth, it was still the closest neutron star in the galaxy. Or, if he was being more cynical, like his friend, a recognition that people cooped up on a ship for generations had little else to do but rethink their mission and roll in it. Worse, their children might grow up and have even more doubts. He appreciated his colleagues' suspicions and understood why the grizzled veteran of the Martian Civil Wars didn't think his XO was properly worried. Nathan Osai was a terraforming specialist, used to working in trinary or binary systems like their destination, and well aware of the difficulties of keeping their ship's ecosystems alive in the habitation drums for such a long journey. He realized Kalu was watching him impatiently and resumed walking.
The Magnificent Seven don't seem like much of a threat to a platoon of Marines.
I wish you wouldn't call them that. It irritates the captain.
The commander laughed. The nickname, originally used to describe the 7 nearest neutron stars to Earth, had accidentally been pinned on the VIPs after a news report covered their final photo at the reception on Tabejard Station. He held up his tablet and pulled up the biographies of their guests. Lin Xun Castillon, born in a high Earth orbital station in 2293, raised in a wealthy family but rose to prominence in the Lagrange governance enclaves. A visionary diplomat and bureaucrat, trusted friend and confidant of many powerful leaders, no known radical political affiliations, squeaky clean.
Idris shook his head. Someone that prominent doesn't just decide to leave for a 1,000-year trip beyond the edge of human space. Either he's on the outs and effectively going into exile, or he's up to something sneaky.
Shall I carry on? Dr. Becky Laurent Hoshino, renowned astrophysicist, expert in neutron stars. She and her husband have been teaching at the Neo-Sears Tower University of Chicago for longer than either of us have been alive. I think she views the mission as both a professional and personal endeavor alongside her husband. Dr. Kenji Hoshino, a historian of lost civilizations, whose centuries of research have made him question whether humanity is truly the first advanced species to walk among the stars. I think he was baiting Treskova over dinner. He's obviously curious about the alien hypothesis too, even if skeptical. So am I. Part of how this mission got its funding was through curiosity about that supposed signal and the neutron star itself. Nobody really believes the alien theory, but it's intriguing enough to stir interest and get the mission moving. We already had quite a few experts on board who were planning to study it as we passed. I think the captain is just irritated that we're now deemed insufficient. Valeria Treskova, ex-military, a lunar marine. Before she was a solar engineer on the star-lifting pilot projects, she worked for the Aitken Basin Alliance Signals and Intelligence Corps, which makes her a logical choice to have investigated that old solar station. Send an ex-marine in case it's pirates. But it also means she's probably used to seeing phantoms in signals. Personally, I think people are crazy to work that close to the sun, living on some magnetically levitating station covered in mirrors just to avoid burning to death. And now she wants to live around a dead star with an even crazier magnetic field and hunt for ancient alien artifacts. That doesn't mean she wants to hijack our ship. Their mission was already tacked on to ours, turning our otherwise peaceful and uneventful colony expedition into something else entirely. What's left to hijack?
And the Jovian? Kalu asked. What's a representative of a powerful mercantile clade doing on board?
Probably the same thing the ape is doing. That neutron star has a companion gas giant that survived when it went supernova 1 million or so years ago. They can settle it just like Jupiter, live in floating cities, mine hydrogen and deuterium. Whatever colony develops there is going to be a fusion economy, not a solar one. The radiation off that star will be too intense for solar panels to be practical due to her constant replacement needs, and all the other small bodies orbiting it are too far out to get useful energy from the dead sun. Besides, the Kipping Exomoon Observatory picked up a moon around the Jovian. They'll need to get all their resources from deep system objects left over after the supernova. It wouldn't be a stretch to think Vec is here as an advance party for Astrosimian settlers wanting a place far from human colonized space. Or the Kyle Clade. After all, they don't even consider themselves human anymore. They've modified themselves to thrive in their floating farms and refineries at Jupiter, and this is likely to be the most valuable gas giant in this region of space. Dead stars are extremely useful for changing speed and direction for ships. It's why we're passing by in the first place.
Nothing to worry about then, Idris Kalu remarked sarcastically. And the android?
Lyra Voss. No idea. She's an AI-human hybrid. Maybe they're looking at using the location for a Matryoshka brain. After all, nobody biological wants to live around a neutron star.
Except Vec and Kyle, apparently. Voss is a poet and allegedly their ship's chronicler, which seems strange, given that there's already a famous historian on board.
Idris, I have thousands of professors in cryo storage covering every specialty you can imagine, and probably 10 times as many people who are artists, scholars, or hobbyists who took up a new profession half a century ago before getting bored and signing up for this trip. I was a microbiologist and an ecological engineer before I signed up as crew. As I recall, you were a terraforming engineer before the fighting broke out on Mars.
I was. And a lifetime before that, I was a farmer in Alberta. People change, which is why it's better to keep them on ice for a long trip.
Point being, said the commander, a lot of job slots are filled by people who are probably more junior and less experienced than others still in cryo. There's a retired admiral and 2 generals in there right now slated to be asteroid miners on arrival because they want a change in life instead of running security.
Or that's just an excuse to come along on a colony, the colonel countered, claiming to be Cincinnatus living on his farm, only to plan a takeover once we arrive. Go ahead, tell me I'm paranoid. That there's nothing to worry about? Then he frowned as he touched his earbud.
You're paranoid, Idris. There's nothing to worry about, Nathan said, his smile fading as his own earbud chirped and the alarms went off.
In space, even the best laid plans can unravel in an instant. And in an era where 1 trillion people call the solar system home, navigating the future might be just as perilous as an interstellar journey. 500 years, 500th episode. Welcome to Science and Futurism with Isaac Arthur for our 500th weekly episode. A couple of years back in 2024, when we did our 400th episode special, we explored life in the year 2323 AD through vignettes about specific people from that era, in homage to the Canterbury Tales. I thought we'd continue that notion today, hence all the Chaucer references. Talking about life and culture hundreds of years from now is very different from exploring space, terraforming, or megastructure engineering. Instead, I find myself trying to envision what drives or motivates someone living in that time, and what sorts of strange people might emerge with the kind of technology we would expect. With humanity expanding across new territories and worlds, what kinds of civilizations might take shape? This time, rather than simply laying out ideas, I'd like to present a story, brief bios that let you fill in the rest in your own mind while we explore what life 500 years from now might actually be like. We could tell the captain's tale, the diplomat's tale, the astrophysicist's tale, the historian's tale, the stellar engineer's tale, the Jovian's tale, the ape engineer's tale, and many others. And maybe one day we will tell them all in true Canterbury Tales style. After all, we already have several narrative-driven episodes that tie into multiple installments, and this one overlaps with life in 2323 AD, life on an interstellar arc ship, life as a planetary governor, and stellar nomads. You don't have to have seen those episodes to follow along, but I imagine some of you who have will catch a few of the Easter eggs we've scattered throughout. But for now, let's talk about life in 2525 AD. A key concept for today's episode is the idea that, for many people living in that era, it isn't their first life, or even their second. Like the characters of the Canterbury Tales, they may be on a pilgrimage of some kind, metaphorical or not, and some of them, they may just be on a redemption arc too. For over a decade now, this show has been exploring science, space, and humanity's future, often using science fiction to help illustrate those possibilities or explain complex scientific concepts. Somewhat ironically, this is not actually our 500th episode. Since year 2, we've numbered episodes based on their production week, adding an A or B if there was more than one in a given week. I doubt most people, even dedicated fans, pay much attention to the numbering, but as regular viewers know, numbers often provide a better guide to the future than intuition, which can start to break down when dealing with vast scales. When I was thinking about how many people might be alive in the year 2525, I ran into the same issue I had in life in 2323 AD, where I somewhat arbitrarily settled on 100 billion, a plausible and round number. For today's episode, I went with 1 trillion for the same reasoning. Both estimates assume humanity isn't reproducing as rapidly as in earlier eras, but that advances in technology have significantly extended lifespans and fertility periods. I suspect that by the end of the century, accidental pregnancy will be an unusual concept, and unwanted pregnancy even rarer, as we will have perfected those sorts of reproductive technologies. At the same time, it will likely be possible to have healthy children at age 60, 90, or even 160. That makes it difficult to predict how quickly we'll produce new people, but if we assume a steady 1% growth rate, similar to today's, then reaching 1 trillion by 2525 seems reasonable. However, I think you only get that number if a significant portion of the population is living off-Earth in expanding colonies across the solar system. What portion of that population would be classically human is hard to say. It might be 0%. Much like life in 2323 AD, our characters in this episode are not meant to represent the norm. The odds are that 99% of the human population in 2525 still lives either on Earth or in its orbital space, and if not, it's still probably at least 90%. Here, I explicitly state that we have a genetically engineered Jovian, an android, and an uplifted gorilla among our 10 named characters. I don't know that it'll be vaguely representative of the population at large, but that's not really the point. In fact, Lyra, in particular, is meant to be a human-AI hybrid rather than a pure AI trying to look human, like our character Gary from 2323, or Lieutenant Commander Data from Star Trek. I also implied that most of the characters were quite old, but ironically, if you have a steady 1% growth rate, that would not be quite true. If we assume population growth has been steady, then 100 years before hitting 1 trillion people, the population would be about 368 billion, meaning 63% of the population would be under 100 years old, and about 40% would be under 50. As we discussed before, there is a strong reason to be moving people to new places, as population growth demands more room, but it's not actually a compelling reason to be colonizing interstellar space, let alone a neutron star system 400 light-years away. I could easily imagine that by this point, humanity is trying to stabilize population growth on Earth by incentivizing migration elsewhere, but the solar system would hardly be full at this stage. If we assume 1 trillion people and 1% annual growth, that means 10 billion people are being born each year. Maybe a bit more if death from accidents, murder, suicide, or sheer boredom is still happening. Earth might need homes for 10 billion new people annually, more than currently lives here. Would also have all the energy, manpower, or robot power needed to casually build a new O'Neill cylinder for every million people migrating off-world. That means 10,000 new O'Neill cylinders would enter service every year. However, cislunar space, or more broadly, Earth's hillsphere, the region where objects orbit Earth rather than the Sun, could comfortably hold over 1 billion O'Neill cylinders. Indeed, they would be quite spaced out. The maximum is ensuring they get enough sunlight and room to radiate waste heat. At this rate of construction, we could keep building them for 100,000 years before things started getting crowded, even just in that available sunlight sense, and they'd still be tiny dots floating around in a mostly empty cloud of space. Given that this region is close enough for real-time communication, just a few seconds of light lag, and that plausible future technologies could allow someone to travel to and from Earth within hours, days, or at most a week, and without an insane energy expenditure, it isn't hard to imagine that this is where most people would prefer to migrate. Not the asteroid belt, not Mars, and certainly not some dead planet light centuries away. Just an area likely to be viewed as the suburbs of Earth proper. On the flip side, even if only 1% of that population growth were being put on interstellar ships, that would still mean a ship carrying 10,000 colonists, a fairly common number in space opera, would be departing for a new star system every single hour. I imagine this was more the case for the first ship sent to Alpha Centauri, where our captain, Dominic Rourke, served as a junior officer before returning years later with everyone from the colony who missed home, or like his XO, was born on the trip or during the colony's early days and wanted to see Earth outside of a history book or virtual reality program. A large, established civilization with extensive space infrastructure would have many ways to launch interstellar ships more efficiently, such as particle beam launchers, magnetic accelerators, or laser sail arrays. Once a colony sets up that kind of infrastructure, you would naturally see waves of return trips as well as follow-up fleets from home carrying more settlers and trade goods. But if we were sending only one of these 10,000-person colony ships to each new star system, then by 2525 we might have sent a ship to every single star or habitable planet within 400 light years, though almost none of them would have arrived yet. More likely, by that point, we'd be sending much larger fleets to promising systems or follow-up waves to recently established colonies, often as soon as we received a signal confirming they were alive and had successfully refueled their fusion reactors at their destination. Our numbers highlight the practical challenges in setups like this. A 26th century civilization would have all the resources to send endless waves of settlers into space, but little motivation, at least when it comes to needing more space or resources. As we noted in our episode on exile at space colonies 2 months ago, colonization would mostly be a way to get rid of troublemakers, people who either disagree with mainstream society or the ruling powers, or who simply want better jobs and don't want to wait centuries for a promotion. After all, it's often better to be governor of a habitat of 100,000 people in the Kuiper Belt, a colony that will grow over time, than to be a junior undersecretary in a bureaucracy so vast that you have to wait centuries for your superiors to get bored or retire. And that's not a great strategy for advancement either. The people at the top tend to either be workaholics to the point of monomania or have exceptionally strong survival instincts, traits that make them unlikely to step aside. Generally, you can break most people's primary motivations into one of 4 basic types. How many types and what to call them can be debatable, but we'll go with money, power, pleasure, and fame. That last is often prestige or honor. Most of us are driven by most or all of these, but we have one that tends to be foremost to us personally, which may or may not shift over time. As Arthur Brooks tends to put it, borrowing from Thomas Aquinas, these are the 4 idols we follow, and we all tend to focus on one, often in a negative context, the concept being they are false idols. If you're curious, you can figure out your own by asking which you would drop first. If by dropping you just assured you had about the average or median amount, so if being assured an average wage worked for you, or average notoriety and respect, money and fame or honor are not yours. Often when trying to figure out how folks act in the future, especially in terms of who gets on board a colony ship, I try to wait in this sort of context, so I jotted one down for each of the characters as I outlined them. Other times I've done characters with a variety of Myers-Briggs personality test profiles or other ones like the Big 5 aspect test. It helps me avoid giving everyone the same motivations and behaviors. The only reason I suspect more than 1% of people wouldn't want to jump on interstellar ships is because migration at that scale means truly leaving civilization behind. Even if those ships are luxurious, and they probably would be, at least by our standards, these are still long voyages with long delays in communication. We talk a lot about colonization, but that's not my main focus today. Here, it mostly serves as a backdrop for introducing our Canterbury-esque pilgrims and trying to emphasize that 99% of 26th century society still resides in or around Earth. But colonization would be a major cultural shift, not because of its size, but because it would replace death as the defining moment in people's lives. In the future, you wouldn't call your friends or family to say, "Grandma passed away." Instead, Grandma would call you to say how happy, but sad, she is that her grandkid, Jane, the one from her 10th daughter Jill, you remember her, right, is migrating out to the moons of Jupiter or boarding a fleet bound for Tau Ceti. Or, as in the case of Becky and Kenji Hoshino, after several hundred years, they might finally decide to migrate down to the Florida system. The Fornacis system. What kind of future awaits humanity 5 centuries from now? Today's episode begins the story of a starship preparing for a journey across deep space, a voyage lasting centuries. We imagine a civilization of abundance and wonder, but none of that happens without energy. In Antimatter Propulsion, our latest Nebula exclusive episode, we explore the most powerful energy source known to physics and how it could drive the future. Whether you're fueling starships or waging interstellar war, antimatter might be the key to building a galactic civilization or destroying one. Antimatter Propulsion is available now only on Nebula, the creator-owned streaming platform where all my episodes air early and ad-free. There you also find our monthly exclusives and incredible content from creators like Real Engineering, Angela Collier, and Up and Atom. And don't miss The Sojourn, a Nebula original sci-fi audio drama set on the fringes of the galaxy, where humanity's future hangs by a thread. With gripping storytelling and richly imagined characters, it's a perfect complement to today's visions of the far future. Today we look at lifetimes in the year 2525, and you can get a lifetime membership to Nebula for as long as you and Nebula exist. Sign up now at go.nebula.tv/IsaacArthur and pay just $300 to unlock all my episodes, early, ad-free, and including monthly exclusives like Antimatter Propulsion, and dozens of other SFA Nebula exclusive episodes and extended editions. Prefer to subscribe annually? You can still get 40% off and enjoy everything Nebula offers for just $36 a year. Now, let's continue our journey to the year 2525. On colonizing gas giants and energy economics. Now, speaking of Jupiter, a lot of colonization plans involving gas giants revolve around a hydrogen economy. Many people assume that means deuterium or helium-3 for fusion, but in reality that won't be the big economic driver in the 26th century. For most of the inner solar system, anywhere closer to the Sun than the asteroid belt, the primary power source will be solar because it's cheap, easy, and reliable. Even if fusion power is widespread, there's no reason not to use the abundant sunlight already available, produced by fusion freely in the Sun. And even if fusion were dominant, fuel wouldn't be the bottleneck, no more than silicon is the bottleneck for solar panels today. Fusion fuel is everywhere and abundant, and when you break it down numerically, the demand just isn't that high. If we evenly distribute all the oil the US consumes annually among its citizens, the typical American uses about 23 barrels per year. What is the equivalent amount of deuterium to generate that same energy? 360 milligrams per person, per year. 1 pound of deuterium would power 1,200 people for a year. That could be easily supplied by Earth's own oceans. In contrast, let's consider a megafreighter from sci-fi, the kind hauling 1 million tons of deuterium back to power our resource-hungry Earth. At 8 billion people, Earth would only need that shipment once every 344 years. Ignoring that at that rate of consumption, it would be untoward millions of years before we'd appreciably decrease the amount available in our oceans. Even in a 1 trillion person 26th century civilization, the same freighter would only need to make the trip once every 3 years, and that's assuming they aren't using solar power for a significant portion of their energy needs. Thus, the Chaos Clade, envisioned as rulers of the storm-racked clouds of Jupiter, operating vast fusion fuel refineries floating in the sky, and engineering wind whales to ride the turbulent currents, along with massive biomechanical reefs drifting through Jupiter's atmosphere, are not sitting on a massive equivalent to oil fueling their wealth. Quite to the contrary, their primary export is just regular old hydrogen and helium, used as bulk mass, propellant for ships, and water production. Ships wanting to move at high speeds would burn through ridiculous amounts of hydrogen as propellant. Meanwhile, water is scarce in the inner system, but abundant in the outer system. Yet water itself is 89% oxygen by mass, an element that is extremely common in the inner system and the asteroid belt, while hydrogen, which makes up just 11% of water's mass, is far rarer. So the true market for Jupiter's hydrogen is in shipping vast quantities of liquid hydrogen to the inner system, a trade that vastly outweighs any demand for deuterium. And while deuterium would still be sold, in many cases there would be no reason to separate it beforehand. Clients in the inner system could simply centrifuge it out themselves while combining it with the oxygen they extract from rocks to make water. Compared to the need for bulk propellant, deuterium or helium-3 is simply a byproduct. Oxygen is a waste product of virtually every mining and refining process, as it makes up about half the mass of most materials we call rock, sand, or dirt. So when a liquid hydrogen tanker arrives in the asteroid belt, or near the moon, it's not dropping off deuterium, at least not by the tanker load. If deuterium is being delivered at all, it's probably someone stepping off the tanker, carrying a propane tank-sized supply of it, and even then, it wouldn't be under guard for fear of robbery, because it still isn't that valuable. Instead, that tanker is effectively delivering deoxygenated water, decarbonated methane, or denitrogenated ammonia, or anything else where hydrogen is only a small fraction of its actual mass but is needed in bulk. Given that icy moons and cometary bodies have an abundance of water, methane, ammonia, and other volatiles, combined with a lack of significant gravity, I'm not sure that mining gas giants would be economically competitive until after those easier-to-access resources were exhausted, which would take far longer than 500 years and a trillion people. However, a fusion-powered mass driver might have no problem slinging huge metal pods full of hydrogen, or other gases, out of Jupiter's gravity well. Energy consumption might not be a major issue, given that an effective infinite energy supply floats in Jupiter's skies, and fusion reactors likely become more efficient the larger you make them. The excess heat could also be used for propulsion vents and for heating lifting gas, potentially allowing for floating continents in Jupiter's upper atmosphere, a topic we explored in more detail in Colonizing Jupiter. Alternatively, a fusion-based economy is far more viable in the outer solar system, where sunlight is too weak for solar power to be practical, and where fusion-propelled spaceships would be necessary for the higher speeds required to travel between points of interest. Beyond economics, I could see many human clades or engineered species, like uplifted gorillas, wanting to be away from mainstream human society while still remaining within the solar system, which would be far cheaper than leaving entirely. A species engineered for low-gravity environments, particularly an arboreal primate species, might find mega projects like building space habitats or comet mining appealing. The same goes for humans engineered for microgravity, potentially even with functional wings for navigating bubble worlds, which they might wear like we would a jacket, or have cybernetically grafted onto them, or have genetically engineered into them. And when asking how far is far enough for a society to feel truly independent, the numbers come into play again. Most of us would feel historically safe if our faction of humanity could hide out in an area the size of a county, 100 miles from the nearest human city. That's roughly the size of an O'Neill cylinder habitat, and even a densely packed Dyson swarm. O'Neill cylinders would be no closer to each other than this. Though you might get lashed together habitat conglomerations like intentional archipelagos in the ocean of the night, something we'll look at in a couple of months. As most people like living near each other, the point is that there's a lot of empty space for those who do not. Now consider 1,000,000 miles. That's 100 times farther than just about any two places on Earth are from one another, and yet it's still only 1/100th the distance to the nearest planet. Go live in the Kuiper Belt, and now you're 1,000 times farther apart than that. Your nearest neighbor might be millions of miles away, the kind of isolation that makes a truly independent society possible. If 1,000,000 miles of empty space all around you doesn't make you feel safely isolated, why would 1,000,000,000? But even then, if true isolation is the goal, the Oort cloud should beckon more than another star system. Because no one is going to invade you to steal your big icy asteroid 100 miles across, sitting 100 billion miles from the sun. But if your splinter of humanity, or neo-humanity, tries to claim an entire solar system, even 100 light years from Earth, don't assume that others won't show up sooner or later, demanding a share of that oasis you've claimed. No different than a single fishing village on the Pacific coast trying to claim the entire ocean for itself. As for the 99% who are not fleeing to the belt, or other stars, they still have another outlet, one that leads to strange new worlds of a different kind. Whether they're living in something akin to modern video games or advanced VR like The Matrix, or have fully uploaded their minds, straddling the hazy boundary between AI and human, the reality is that as long as you have computers and energy, digital existence remains the cheapest way to accommodate people who want something that regular Earth and society are not offering them. You could have massive computer stacks rivaling the size of skyscrapers positioned outside any city, acting not just as servers but as downtown hubs, places where people spent most of their time, virtually rather than physically. Or some might physically relocate to giant armored bunkers, entering amniotic pods like the ones seen in The Matrix, stacked 1,000 wide and high, forming a city of 1,000,000,000 minds, not in streets and towers, but in digital landscapes of their own creation. Just some big armored pyramid where nutrient fluid was made by recycling waste material and non-organically processing that back into carbs and protein. If you want to leave, they'll give you an exoskeleton and massive amounts of steroids to handle your atrophied muscles. Or things might be even more packed and cheaper to run with brains and tanks, because with sufficient technology, they would not even need an android body to ride in. They could exit by just having their old body regrown, or kept on ice so you could thaw it and reimplant the brain, which might be cheap if the computers also need major cooling. As I've noted before, you're more likely to expand ecosystems and nature preserves in space than to try and restore them on Earth. In a future where land on Earth is the most valuable real estate in the universe, freeing up millions of hectares to regrow a forest might be far more difficult than simply commissioning a few space habitats designed for that purpose, ones that can be placed somewhere safe from human interference. Invasive species and unwatched poachers would face a much greater challenge trying to infiltrate a sealed space habitat than sneaking into a terrestrial preserve. Though the latter might relish the challenge, they'd have to survive thousands of miles of vacuum first, and even if they made it that far, they'd still need to breach the giant armored shell of a habitat, one that is covered in cameras, sensors, radar, and most likely, gun turrets. To my thinking, this is what much of humanity is up to in this era. See an episode we did about 2 years ago, Space Habitats, for more details on some of the variety of structures themselves. By 2525, I'd expect construction of these to start taking over as a major economic driver for growth. Either you've lost the fight to AI overlords, or you've found a way to employ advanced automation safely, and those AI overlords might not even be computers. They could just as easily be transhumans who have wired up their own brains using the same kind of technology that make AI so impressive. It's a bit of a suspension of disbelief that we work into many of our episodes, just like sci-fi handwaves FTL travel, because in reality, your typical human centuries from now is likely to be heavily augmented in some way. That might be genetic, cybernetic, or simply wearable technology. A significant portion of your brain function, reflexes, and subconscious processes might be offloaded to computers you wear or access via the cloud, connected through a brain scanner no more noticeable than a pair of glasses or a hair clip. These devices wouldn't feel like external tools. They'd seamlessly integrate into your thought processes, responding so quickly that they'd function like an extra lobe of your brain, rather than something surgically implanted. You might not even need cybernetic or genetic engineering to enhance yourself. Instead, you could be so superbly educated, trained, and physically optimized that you could outpace any Olympic athlete or Nobel laureate while still having the same genetic foundation as people today or 500 years ago. And as we often emphasize, given the pace of technological advancement, this you might not be hypothetical. It might literally be you or me in 500 years, left as a relic of this era, not thinking of ourselves as augmented any more than modern people think of medications or smartphones as enhancements. So, what option would you choose? Would you go all in on becoming a cyborg or android, living mostly in the physical world but heavily augmented? Would you be king in a virtual paradise, or a Disney princess, free to exit into shared virtual realities or normal life whenever you pleased, but spending most of your free time drifting between various fantasy realms? Would you upload your mind entirely, experiencing centuries of simulated realities in just a month of real time, pausing only occasionally to pop out into a Zoom call or an android body to handle business or visit friends and family, then returning with no time having passed, or even letting the simulations keep running while you were absent? Maybe you joined some hive mind or are part of the collected memories of some wider AI into which millions of human minds were scanned. Would you own a farm on a vast rotating space habitat or a domed colony on Mars? Would you board a ship to a virgin star system or hold out for some crazy mission to the edge of reality to investigate an alien signal? Maybe you had yourself cloned or duplicated so part of you could stay behind and another copy left to explore strange new worlds. Would you modify your brain so that while inside various virtual fantasies, you believed them to be real, only recalling they were simulations when you emerge for real-world life or pre-programmed breaks? Assuming we are still around to make any choices, the options would be almost limitless, and perhaps in such a future, in the year 2525, the hardest decision would be choosing just one. 500 years ago, we looked to the stars and imagined our place among them. 500 years from now, we may be more than we ever dreamed, yet still asking the same question we always have: what comes next? because as much as humanity changes, our curiosity, our ambition, and our hunger for the future never will. Thanks for joining us for our 500th episode. I hope you'll stick around for 500 more, and I plan to keep writing them because the best thing about the future, there's always so much more of it. And for those who doubt we can reach out to such places, to forge new worlds, claim great destinies, or reach for the stars, don't tell me the sky is the limit when there are footprints on the moon.
Welcome to Deck 500, Cargo Bay 22.
Is it done?
Yes, here's the readout. It is as we were told to expect. Going forward, all relevant data will route to us first. Hoshino's will have the data scrubbed and timestamp changed.
If the readings are accurate, the neutron star is unstable.
Exactly why we need to get ahead of the official team, before they realize what they're standing on.
And if they do?
Then we find out how expendable they really are.
Excellent. Contact the others and let them know the device is ready.